Hi guys, welcome to my channel. It's Hila here from Saturday Night Stitch. Today's post is a little bit different. I'm going to be sharing with you how I sewed up Burda style for 2017 style number 107, which is a dress that I have so much love for. Now, in this video, I'm not actually going to cover tracing the magazine pattern because I did do a video about that, and the link is in the description box down below. So basically, for 2017 is one of my favorite issues of Burda style, and I traced quite a lot of patterns from this magazine when it actually initially came through my post book. So the pattern had been sitting there for over a year just waiting to be cut out. And when I found the fabric that I saw a sample of at the Stitch Room social, I knew that the fabric was definitely going to be perfect for this style of dress. The fabric is a John Caldo crepe jersey that I bought from Sew Essential. I got 1.5 meters of the fabric, and that was enough to actually make this dress. So I'm not going to show cutting out because I basically decided to record this after I'd already cut out the fabric, but I'm showing you there that I use a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and I'm showing you some of the markings on the pattern. And it's very important with this particular pattern to get those markings because trust me, every single marking on that pattern comes in handy. So you're definitely going to need some cotton tape. That's what you use for the ruching, and that's what will keep the gathering on the side. Again, I mentioned that those markings are incredibly essential because you can see the asterisk points. They tell you at which point you have to start doing your gathering stitches on the side. So you gotta make sure that you have those on point, otherwise everything will be mismatched, and I can't stress that enough. And it's so simple to make sure that you get everything sorted beforehand. Now I'm actually using ballpoint needles because it's a stretch fabric, and it's just it works so much better than using the universal needle. I'm also going to be using my walking foot for this project because I am working with a stretch fabric, and if you've ever used a walking foot before, you will know that it is great for making sure that both the fabrics are being fed evenly into the machine. So I highly recommend using a walking foot, especially if you've got the more lighter weight fabrics, of which this John Calder Porsche fabric definitely is lighter weight. So I've just done my gathering stitches on there, and the instructions tell you the exact dimensions that you have to gather your side seams to. So I'm trying to show you how I actually did it using my knackered dressmaker's tape, which I've had since I started sewing actually, and I love that tape. I'm so sentimental about it. But there's the gathering all done up, ready to be sewn together. Now I use wonder clips. I don't generally use a lot of pins when I'm sewing, but I find wonder clips incredibly useful, especially when I'm working with stretch fabrics, or especially when gathering is involved, and I want to make sure that those gathering the gathered fabric doesn't move around when I'm actually sewing it up. And so what I did when I made this dress was I used a sewing machine seam first of all to sew over the gathered bits before I then attached the tape using my wonder clips, and then I put it through the overlocker, and you'll see what that looks like once it is done. But that tape, it just makes sure that your gathers don't move about because you want them to stay put on this style. You can see that it looks a lot neater once I've run it through the overlocker, catching the cotton tape in the seam allowance. And what that does is it removes the stretch around the bit with the ruching, but you can see that the bit that doesn't have the cotton tape, the seam that doesn't have any cotton tape on it, doesn't stretch out, and that's what you need to do. So this is the same step that you have to follow for both the right and the left side seam and the center back seam, following the instructions that tell you exactly how much to gather. Okay, so once the center back seam has been put together, you then have to bind that little opening using the band. By the way, there isn't a pattern piece for the band. The dimensions are provided for on a table, and you just have to cut out the dimensions. It's one of the things that I like about Burda style patterns. The band will be slightly smaller than the opening, and that's the trick to getting it to lay flat. And I'll show you just now how I do that. But before I do that, I just wanted to show you how absolutely beautiful and lovely this fabric is. I'm so in love with this fabric. Okay, so the band has been ironed in half, wrong sides facing, and I have pinned the exact center point of the band because that center point has to match with the center back seam. So I'm going to attach it to the center back seam, and then I have to stretch the band out on either side so that it's attached to the end. And you can see there, it stretches out a little bit, but that's what allows you to that is what allows it to lay flat against the body. And so you just stretch it out as you're sewing on. Unfortunately, because I only have two hands, I could not record actually stretching out and sewing it on by myself, but I think you get the idea. So there it is, sewn up. It looks like a curve right now, and it doesn't look right, but trust me, once you finish the rest of the dress, it will all work out. So there I've stitched down the seam allowance, which is a finish that I like very much on knit fabric. So I overlocked the band to the dress itself, and then I stitched down the seam allowance, and there you've got the back yoke that you now have to sew on to the back of the dress. So the seams have to be attached from where the armhole is towards the inside, and then I just have to sew those up using the sewing machine. And then once those are sewn up, I just have to press that seam allowance over the yoke so that you can't actually see the raw edge, and then that's just stitched down, and I will show you very shortly what that looks like once it's done. And there you go. So that's the yoke sewn in, and the seam allowance pressed under, and then it's been stitched over, and it creates that nice looking peekaboo detail above the shoulder. And so that's the back of the dress, more or less done. So I do a dance break whenever I finish a stage of the dress, because you gotta dance. You just gotta dance to celebrate your successes. So for the next step is to prepare the shoulders so that we can attach the front of the dress to the back of the dress. So the shoulder seam in knit dresses is incredibly important. It's the one that suffers quite a lot of stress when you're pulling it on and off. So it's quite important to reinforce it. And I tend to do this on every single thing that I make that uses a stretch fabric. And I basically use some interfacing, right? In this particular case, I'm actually using some stretch interfacing just to provide a little bit of extra stability on that seam, and I just press it on. So I never throw out any bits of scrap interfacing for that reason. And also be careful to make sure that you've got the glue on the right side, and don't do what I did there by ironing it on to my pressing cloth. But you can see on there that I've reinforced the shoulders using some knit interfacing, which I also bought from Sew Essential. The link will be in the description box down below. But this is if you want to make clothes that will last for a long time and not show too much wear and tear, definitely reinforce those shoulder seams. And we now have something that's kind of like a dress, and so I normally at that stage just like to put it over my head and, you know, get an idea of what it might look like. Okay, moving on, the next step is to sew up the side seam. So make sure that my side seams are entirely aligned up perfectly, and then I'll use a few more wonder clips on those gathers again, just to make sure that the gathering doesn't move around whilst I sew it on. So this is the same process as for the center back seam that was done at the very beginning. And so I'm just showing you there the gathering stitches. Now, I sometimes don't necessarily use 2 lines of stitching depending on the weight of the fabric. I find that sometimes 1 line of stitching is enough, but I have to be careful not to sort of yank it and risk breaking the thread. But I do feel like 1 line of stitching can work just as well depending on the particular type of fabric, and this one was a nice lightweight fabric for that. And I've added the wonder clips onto the gathering to make sure that that doesn't move about when I actually put it through the sewing machine before I then run it through the overlocker with the stay tape. So I've just done one of the side seams, and I just wanted to check and make sure that it's not too baggy, because sometimes with ruching, if it's not as tight as it's supposed to be, the ruches can actually sort of drop, and that makes it look saggy rather than ruchy, if you get what I mean. But once I checked it, I felt like, okay, no, the size is fine, it's working out well. And then I went to actually sew it up. So trying on along the way is a very useful thing to do, especially if you're making something that is fitted. Okay, and there I am with my cotton tape that I'm just putting on there to make sure that the fabric doesn't stretch out along that ruching. And there you go, we've got a neat looking seam that is encased in overlocking, and also with the cotton tape that just prevents it from stretching out. I wonder how many times I've said ruching already, but it's a style that's got a lot of ruching, so that's gonna pop up quite a lot. Okay, so the next thing to do once those shoulder seams and those side seams are done is to do the neckband, which you can do earlier if you wanted to, but yeah, so the first step with the neckband obviously is to sew it up to make the ring and press it in half, wrong sides facing, and then I just use my wonder clips to distribute it evenly along the neckline, and obviously it is going to be smaller in circumference than the actual neckline itself, and I have to stretch out that neckband in order to get it to lie nice and flat. And I used my overlocker straight away for that, and that's what it looks like. And then the next stage after this will be just to do a line of stitching over the overlocked seam, and that will just create a nice thing. And there's my lovely spider plant. That's a new addition to my sewing cave, and I really like the beautiful positive vibes it adds. So before I stitch down that allowance, I press the neckband flat using my silk organza pressing cloth. You know, never press your precious fabric without a pressing cloth. It's a great investment. Silk organza is a little bit expensive, but it is totally worth it. It's one of the most used things in my sewing cave. Okay, so there we go. We have a nicely, perfectly flat neckline that I am just incredibly proud of. And it was around at this time that I was getting super excited with this project, and I really couldn't wait to finish it so that I could put it on. So there is the sleeve for the dress. Again, you have to make sure that you get those markings correct, because the front side of a sleeve is not the same as the back side with this particular style. So you need to have that one notch that tells you where the front of the sleeve is. I think it's the front. I can't remember, but the bodies will have the matching marks. So I'm making it a short sleeved dress, and this is actually a set-in sleeve, and it's not fun, I won't lie to you, it's not fun setting in a sleeve using a stretch fabric. but it is well worth doing it because it does create a nice finish. It probably takes double the time. But there are my gathering stitches on the sleeve head to show you how I can tell that I've got enough easing. Basically, if I can sort of like tuck the sleeve over my curled fingers, that's enough easing for me. And again, I use my wonder clips to attach the sleeve to the armhole, and that will go into the sewing machine first to make sure that there aren't any tucks as I sew the eased-in sleeve to the armhole before I then use the overlocker to neaten up the seam. So once the sleeves are sewn in, it's just giving them a nice press, because a pressed seam is such a pleasure to behold. For the hems, I just turn them under and press them. I didn't quite show you using my clapper, but my tailor's clapper comes in handy for this job as well. My favorite hem is this triple zigzag stitch for stretch fabrics, and I just get it onto that. It creates a really nice finish. I tend not to like just the normal zigzag stitch, and that looks really nice there. I'm just trying to show you what it looks like, and I just give them a nice press, and this fabric responds so well to a steam iron. That's one of my favorite qualities of good fabric, you know, when it responds really nicely to iron. And another thing that I do with ruching, just to give it a nice finished look and it's not too bulky, is to just give it a very gentle press with a lot of steam, and I find that that just creates a nicer look. It's not my first time making a ruched dress, because I made a Vogue I think it's 9112, which had ruching along the sides. So once that was done, once the pressing was done, I had a lovely dress that I wore the next day and for many days during the summer, and I absolutely loved it. And it's the same dress that you'll have seen in my last makes video, and the link is in the description box down below. So thank you so much for watching, guys. I really hope that you've enjoyed the video and just getting a little bit of an insight into how I tackle some of my projects. This was a very quick dress to make up, and yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do give it a big thumbs up down below. If you haven't already, do subscribe for new sewing related videos every week. And until I see you next time, happy sewing. Bye.